What would you do if the person who promised to love you forever suddenly decided you weren't worth their time anymore? Well, let me tell you what I did when my husband sent me that text message that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March when my phone buzzed with a message that would shatter my world into a million pieces. I was in the kitchen of our modest ranch house in suburban Dallas, stirring a pot of chili for dinner, the same recipe I'd been making every Tuesday for the past 5 years. The routine had become my security blanket, something predictable in a marriage that had grown increasingly cold and distant. When I saw my husband Mark's name on the screen, I expected the usual running late or grab milk on your way home message. We'd been married for 12 years, together since college, and I thought I knew everything about this man who used to hold my hand during scary movies and bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. I was devastatingly wrong. The message read, "I'll find something better. I want a divorce." Just like that. No explanation, no conversation, no attempt to work things out. 12 years of marriage, 2 miscarriages we'd weathered together, countless dreams we'd shared about growing old on the front porch of this very house. All of it reduced to a cold, calculated text message sent while he was probably sitting in his car in some parking lot, too cowardly to say it to my face. I stared at those words until they blurred through my tears, reading them over and over as if the meaning might change. My hands shook as I turned off the burner under the chili, a meal he'd never eat in a home he was apparently already planning to abandon. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on the only words I could manage. Okay? I changed my mind about a lot of things too. I didn't even realize how prophetic those words would become, or how they would define the next chapter of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Mark had been distant for months, maybe even longer if I'm being honest with myself. He'd started working late at the accounting firm where he was a junior partner, going out with his buddies more often, and treating me like I was invisible in my own home. When I'd try to talk to him about it, to bridge the growing chasm between us, he'd brush me off with comments that cut deeper than any knife. "You've let yourself go, Rachel," he'd say while scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to look at me. "When's the last time you bought yourself something nice to wear? Or did your hair? You used to care about how you looked." "You're boring," was another favorite. "The women at the office, they're interesting. They talk about things besides grocery lists and what's on TV. They have ambitions, goals. They're going places." I was 34 years old, and according to my husband, I was already past my expiration date, a relic of the woman he'd once fallen in love with. Each comment chipped away at my self-worth until I started to believe maybe he was right. Maybe I had become ordinary, predictable, forgettable. The worst part wasn't even Mark's betrayal, though that cut deep enough to leave scars I thought might never heal. The worst part was how quickly everyone else seemed to agree with his assessment of me, as if they'd all been waiting for someone to finally voice what they'd been thinking all along. When news of our impending divorce spread through our small community, because nothing stays secret in a town where everyone knows everyone else's business, the reactions were swift and predictably cruel. People who'd smiled at me in the grocery store for years suddenly had opinions about my marriage, my appearance, my worth as a woman. My mother-in-law, Patricia, didn't waste any time sharing her thoughts. She called me 3 days after Mark moved out, suggesting we meet for coffee at the local diner where half the town would see us together. I should have known it was a setup. "Well, honey," she said over her usual black coffee and slice of apple pie, her voice dripping with the kind of false sympathy Southern women have perfected into an art form. "You can't really blame Mark for wanting something more. You've gotten comfortable, haven't you? Complacent, even. When was the last time you did your hair properly or bought yourself something nice to wear? A man needs to feel proud of the woman on his arm." She paused to take a sip of coffee, letting her words sink in like poison. "I'm not saying it's all your fault, dear, but marriage is work. Maybe if you'd put in a little more effort, shown him you still cared about being attractive, being interesting." Her words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully calculated to reinforce what Mark had already made me believe about myself. But Patricia wasn't done. Mark's always been ambitious, you know. He needs someone who can keep up with him, someone who challenges him and makes him want to be better, someone who brings something to the table besides keeping house. I sat there, stunned into silence, watching this woman who'd welcomed me into her family 12 years ago systematically tear me down in public. Other customers in the diner pretended not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. By evening, the entire town would know that even Mark's own mother thought I wasn't good enough for him. My own sister, Linda, wasn't much better when she called later that week. Linda had always been the successful one, the lawyer in Houston with the big house and the important husband and the perfectly planned life. She'd never quite understood how I'd ended up in a small town, married to an accountant, working at the county clerk's office. "Maybe this is a wake-up call, Rachel," she said during one of our phone conversations, her voice carrying that tone she'd used since we were kids, the one that made it clear she thought she knew better. "I mean, I hate that you're going through this, but you have to admit you've been in survival mode for so long, just going through the motions. Mark probably felt like he was married to a roommate, not a wife. You've been playing it safe for years," she continued, warming to her theme. "Same job, same routine, same everything. Maybe Mark just outgrew you. Maybe he needs someone who pushes him, who has her own goals and ambitions. You can't blame a man for wanting more than someone who's content to just exist." Even my closest friend, Sarah, whom I'd known since high school and trusted with my deepest secrets, managed to twist the knife a little deeper during what was supposed to be a supportive girls' night out. We were sitting in her living room with a bottle of wine, and I thought she'd be the one person who would understand, who would see Mark's behavior for what it really was. "I mean, I love you, you know that," she said, swirling her wine and avoiding my eyes. "But you have to admit you've been kind of ordinary lately. Predictable. Maybe Mark just wants someone who challenges him, you know? Someone who makes him think, who brings out the best in him." She took a long sip of wine before continuing. "It's like you stopped growing after you got married. You got comfortable, and comfortable isn't sexy. It isn't exciting. Maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise. A chance for you to figure out who you really are when you're not just somebody's wife." Ordinary. There was that word again, the one that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Is that really how everyone saw me? As ordinary, forgettable, replaceable? Had I become so unremarkable that even my closest friends thought I deserved to be discarded? The comments kept coming from unexpected places. The checkout girl at the grocery store, who'd heard about the divorce through her mother, made a point of telling me how lucky Mark was to get a fresh start at his age. The woman at the dry cleaner suggested I might want to update my wardrobe now that I was back on the market. Even my hairdresser, whom I'd been seeing for years, mentioned that maybe it was time for a complete makeover, since my current look was a little too housewife. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It might be the most painful place you've ever been, but it also gives you a solid foundation to build from. And sometimes, when you've been knocked down so completely that you can't possibly fall any further, you realize that the only direction left to go is up. That night, after Mark had moved out and taken half our furniture with him, including the coffee table we'd bought together on our first anniversary and the bookshelf I'd spent weeks refinishing, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the gaps where our shared life used to be, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg him to come back. I wasn't going to fall apart and give everyone in town the satisfaction of watching me crumble into the pathetic, discarded wife they apparently expected me to become. Instead, I was going to prove every single one of them wrong. I was going to show them that ordinary was just a starting point, not a final destination. I was going to discover what I was capable of when I wasn't trying to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. The first thing I did was take a long, hard look at my life with the kind of brutal honesty I'd been avoiding for years. Mark was right about one thing. I had gotten comfortable. I'd been working the same administrative job at the county clerk's office for 8 years, following the same routine day after day, wearing the same style of clothes that had been fashionable when I first started dating Mark. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped growing, stopped dreaming, stopped being curious about what I could become. I'd made my world smaller and smaller until it fit perfectly within the confines of Mark's expectations, never pushing against the boundaries he'd set for me. But comfortable doesn't mean worthless, and ordinary doesn't mean powerless. It just means you haven't discovered your extraordinary yet. I started small because small was all I could handle at first. I cleaned out my closet and donated everything that made me feel frumpy or invisible, which turned out to be almost everything I owned. I went to the library and checked out books about personal finance, starting a business, real estate investing, and digital marketing. I signed up for online courses about social media management and graphic design. I wasn't sure where any of it would lead, but I knew I needed to start moving forward, to start feeding my mind again after years of letting it stagnate. Every book I read, every course I completed, felt like a small act of rebellion against everyone who'd written me off as ordinary. The divorce proceedings were brutal in the way that only small-town divorces can be, where everyone has an opinion and privacy is a luxury you can't afford. Mark's lawyer painted me as a lazy woman who'd contributed nothing to our marriage except domestic labor. In her version of our story, I was a financial burden who'd been content to coast on Mark's success while bringing nothing to the table myself. Mark himself seemed to take pleasure in listing all my failures and shortcomings in legal documents that would become part of the public record. He described me as unmotivated, lacking in ambition, and content with mediocrity. He claimed I'd failed to grow personally or professionally during our marriage. But something interesting happened as I absorbed each cruel assessment. Instead of breaking me down further, they began to fuel something else entirely. Every harsh word, every attempt to diminish me, became fuel for a fire that had been dormant for so long I'd forgotten it existed. While Mark was busy parading his new girlfriend around town, a 26-year-old secretary from his firm named Brittany, who wore short skirts and laughed too loud at all his jokes, I was quietly building something entirely different. I discovered that I had a natural talent for social media marketing, something that had never occurred to me during all those years of managing our family's Facebook page. I started taking on small clients while still working my day job, learning as I went and building my skills through trial and error. A local bakery that wanted help reaching more customers online became my first real client. Then a boutique owned by a woman who'd gone through her own bitter divorce and understood the need to rebuild from scratch. Then a home renovation company whose owner had heard about my work through word of mouth. Each project taught me something new. Each success built my confidence, and each client became a stepping stone towards something I was only beginning to understand. I was working 18-hour days, falling into bed exhausted every night. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. My transformation wasn't just professional. I started taking better care of myself, not to win Mark back or to prove anything to the people who'd written me off, but because I was finally beginning to believe I deserved it. I joined a gym and discovered that I actually enjoyed strength training, that there was something deeply satisfying about watching my body grow stronger as my mind expanded. I found a hairstylist in Dallas who helped me find a cut that made me feel modern and confident instead of stuck in the past. I learned to cook new cuisines and started hosting dinner parties for the few friends who'd stuck by me through the divorce. But the biggest change was internal, invisible to everyone else but fundamental to everything that would follow. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped making myself smaller to make other people comfortable. I started saying no to things that didn't serve me, and yes to opportunities that scared me, but excited me too. Nobody noticed at first, which was exactly how I wanted it. I was tired of performing for other people, tired of seeking validation from people whose opinions had proven to be so worthless. 6 months after Mark left, I was approached by a regional chain of fitness centers that needed help with their digital marketing strategy. It was my biggest client yet, requiring me to develop comprehensive social media campaigns and coordinate with their marketing team on a level I'd never attempted before. The project terrified me, but I was learning to see fear as a compass pointing toward growth rather than a stop sign. The campaign was more successful than anyone had expected. Within 3 months, the fitness centers had seen a 40% increase in new memberships, and their social media engagement had tripled. Word began to spread through the business community about the small-town woman who delivered big city results. Soon, I was getting calls from businesses 3 states away. I quit my job at the county clerk's office and officially launched my own digital marketing consultancy. Within a year, I was making more money than Mark and I had ever made together. But more importantly, I was building something that was entirely mine, something that reflected my own values and vision. The recognition started slowly, then gained momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. A local business magazine wrote an article about successful female entrepreneurs in our area, and I was featured on the cover under the headline, "From Housewife to CEO, One Woman's Journey to Success." Suddenly, everyone wanted to know my story. I was invited to speak at business conferences, women's groups, and entrepreneurship meetups. Local television stations wanted to interview me about my success. That's when things got really interesting. Mark's mother, Patricia, was among the first to reach out after the magazine article hit newsstands. The same woman who'd publicly humiliated me in the diner suddenly wanted to have lunch to catch up and celebrate my success. She spent the entire meal trying to backtrack on everything she'd said about me during the divorce, claiming she'd always known I had potential and had been rooting for me all along. My sister Linda started calling more frequently, asking for business advice and wanting to know if I could help her law firm with their digital marketing. Sarah suddenly wanted to collaborate on projects, talking about how she'd always seen my potential. But the sweetest moment came almost 2 years after that devastating text message. I was at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, wearing a tailored blazer and feeling confident after a successful client presentation, when I ran into Mark near the produce section. He looked older somehow, tired in a way that expensive clothes couldn't hide. His young girlfriend was nowhere to be seen. I'd heard through the town gossip network that Brittany had left him for someone with better prospects. "Rachel," he said, his voice uncertain, "you look different. Good. Really good. Success suits you." "Thank you," I replied calmly, not offering anything more. He shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about your business. That's really impressive. I always knew you were smart, but I never imagined you had this in you." The lie hung in the air between us. We both knew he'd never thought I was smart, never imagined I was capable of anything beyond keeping his house clean. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we ended things too hastily. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime, talk about things, see if there's still something worth saving between us." I looked at this man who'd once made me feel worthless, who'd reduced our 12-year marriage to a cruel text message, and I smiled. "Mark," I said gently, "I did find something better. I found myself." I left him standing in the produce aisle and walked away, my head held high. The business continued to grow beyond anything I'd ever imagined possible. I hired employees, opened an office, started speaking at conferences about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. I bought a beautiful house with the garden I'd always dreamed of having. I traveled to places I'd never imagined visiting. But the real victory was looking in the mirror every morning and seeing someone I was proud to be, someone who'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into the best thing that could have happened. I started getting invited to speak at events for women going through divorce, sharing my story, and encouraging others to see their endings as beginnings. I talked about the importance of not letting other people's limited vision of you become your own reality. 3 years after that text message that had shattered my world, I was sitting in my home office when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from Mark. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. You've become everything I never thought you could be, and I realize now that I was the one holding you back. Is there any chance we could try again?" I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the woman who'd once been devastated by his words. Then I deleted the message without responding. Some chapters of your life are meant to stay closed. Today, when I think about that devastating text message, I feel nothing but gratitude. Not for Mark, but for the wake-up call, for the push out of my comfort zone, for the opportunity to discover who I really was underneath all those years of playing small. The best revenge isn't getting back at someone who wronged you. The best revenge is becoming so genuinely happy and successful that you forget why you wanted revenge in the first place. My story isn't unique. Every day, women are being underestimated, dismissed, and abandoned by people who can't see their true potential. But their opinion of you is not the truth about you. You have the power to rewrite your story, to reinvent yourself, to build a life so fulfilling that the people who couldn't appreciate you become irrelevant to your happiness. The woman who received that cruel text message could never have imagined the life I'm living now, but she had something that made all of this possible. The courage to believe she deserved better and the determination to create it. So, if you're going through your own difficult time, if someone has made you feel ordinary or worthless, know that their inability to see your value says nothing about your worth and everything about their limitations. Your story isn't over. This might just be the beginning of your most incredible chapter yet. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. We're all in this together, and your story matters more than you know.